Today we're going to talk about redshift. Basically what we need to know is, what does it mean that the universe is expanding? This is a remarkably often repeated statement. It's not wrong to say that as long as you know what you're saying. The problem that I originally had is that, first of all, it's repeated so often without any explanation whatsoever for what it could possibly mean that it sounds remarkably like propaganda. That's because it is propaganda. Science is supposed to be explanatory. You can't just come out and say that the universe is expanding without saying what you mean, because even a child will ask, what does it expand into? I've read probably dozens of attempted explanations. You'll see over here I have a small outline of the evolution of the idea. Probably the most common attempted explanation for this really a remarkable paradox is that the space itself is expanding. This is an amazing thing to say without any explanation in science. It's a tragedy, really, that this paradox is repeated billions and billions of times. But professors, anyone who thinks that they know something about the universe, will immediately and with a great deal of glee and joy tell anybody who's willing to listen, well, that's actually a nonsensical statement. One needs to question the person who's saying it to be sure you're on the same page. Otherwise, it's just exactly like talking about God. The problem with God and with cosmological expansion is that when you say God and the other person nods their head, you're definitely not on the same page. In the case of God, it's rather easy and simple to see why. It's something that it has no scientific meaning. We adapt to whatever the person is saying, and we just assume that we know what the other person is saying. That leads to tragedy. In science, it leads to disaster. You must never assume in science that the person who uses a term that's in any way questionable knows what they're saying in the same sense that you understand what they're saying. Otherwise, assume applies here. Assume is made of those three words, as we all know. Now, what is it? What is the reason for saying that at all? Only one measurement. It was made by several men. Here you'll see a red-shifted waveband of light. It's a linear relationship. Redshift is the only measurement that suggests that the universe is expanding. Redshift is interpreted as Doppler shift. To say something over and over again, billions and billions of times in science, is a decidedly bad situation. Because in science you're supposed to explain anything that does not seem to make sense. And in this case, it does not make any sense at all. In this outline here is a very abbreviated but rather informative history. Just bulleted items. You'll see there are 7 dates there. In 1912, a man named Vestos Slipher used spectroscopy to measure the redshift. You can measure the movement of absorption lines, and you'll see the arrows pointing up to the right. This is the difference between a starlight from the sun and starlight from a distant galaxy, which is of course a composite of a lot of stars. But the absorption lines do appear to move, and they themselves don't actually move. It's the continuous band that's being shifted in this direction, causing the absorption lines to appear to shift in this direction. but of course it's just foreground, background. They're shifting with respect to each other. That can be measured, and it's measured in angstroms or nanometers. What does that mean? It was actually discovered, or it's attributed to Edwin Powell Hubble. That's the highlighted or emboldened 1929. Why that is attributed to Hubble is due to the fact that he had access to the Mount Wilson telescope, which was by far the most powerful telescope at that time. And he was able to get quite a few readings from quite a few galaxies, and he was able to show a correlation between the redshift and the apparent distance of the galaxy. Apparent distance in this case would be the size of the galaxy. Now that depends on one knowing what is a normal size of a galaxy. It is a simple measurement. It's a linear relationship between distance and redshift. Linear means basically a direct correlation. Now in local space that may not appear to be the case. There are blue-shifted galaxies. Andromeda, our closest neighbor, has a blue shift. And there are blue shift readings of galaxies as far as the Virgo cluster, which is not far on cosmic scale. It's part of our own local system of galaxies. But why would one assume that the universe is expanding from this relationship? Doppler shift is very easy to understand in terms of sound waves. Doppler shift of light is what it's assumed to be. Now, in trying to figure out why astrophysics has accepted the relationship that this is a Doppler shift, one would have to be sure of that, and there has been some controversy in the past. All the top-notch astrophysicists begin by assuming that everyone knows that the universe is expanding. Oh, and they're delighted to tell you. Because it's considered to be a velocity relationship. So what do the physicists say that space is expanding into? You will not get a direct answer. Well, you already know there is no answer. What does it mean? Let's say that you're willing to believe that. How do I rationalize that? Because space would have to be expanding into something that's not space. I have never heard an answer to that. And in fact, about 10 years ago, I got the transcripts of a Leningrad convention of cosmologists. The top cosmologists of the world met to talk about cosmological expansion. And I read their papers. It was just like a cat fight. It was, I mean, the hair was flying. These men were angry at each other because each one of these experts accused all of the other cosmologists around them of having the wrong impression. And it went ad hominem. These men are supposed to be representing science, but when they got together to talk about what exactly do we mean by that, none of them agreed with each other. Oh, that's fabulous. I learned a lot from that. It's very dense reading, as you might imagine, but it's shown through, with diligent reading, it's shown through that they actually don't really know what they're saying. You have to have a medium into which to expand. So what is it that you're inventing that's anti-physical? What anti-physical principle are you introducing to explain physics? Because you have got to have a proof. If you're suggesting something anti-physical, imagine if you presented this idea to Newton, that space, which he considered to be continuous, and it's coherent, consistent, it's just space. It's the simplest thing that we know of. So, what's it expanding into? Emptiness? That's the definition of space. So, you've basically invented a new kind of space in which regular space that we all know about from physics, that regular space is expanding into, I guess you would have to say, superspace, but nobody ever says that because there's no such thing. There's no proof of that. So really, logic is being turned on its head. It's actually a logical error. The simplest version of that is the sun looks like it's going around the earth. Well, therefore it is. And that's not science, but that is how, before Copernicus, to give a benchmark to it, that's inverted logic. That's basically just saying it looks like it and therefore it is. Well, you can say that about the sun as well, and that's illogical. Now, cosmological expansion, the expansion of the universe, uses exactly the same logic. We have redshift, and so it's always said everything is moving away from everything else. So this is to award to space a property of expansion. What I would like to assert instead of that is another proposition that accounts for redshift. According to this outline, this is how the progression went. In 1912, Vesto Slipher took enough readings, enough spectrograms of galaxies, that he was able to assert that they show redshift. He didn't know how far away they were, but by apparent size, that the further away it looked to be, the more it showed apparent recessive velocity. He didn't extrapolate on that, he just pointed it out. Now, 10 years later, Alexander Friedmann, you see it's 1922, he used the Einstein field equation. He composed a solution for the Einstein field equation that suggested that the universe might be expanding. Now, the next year, Hubble proved how far away Andromeda is, and we discussed that in the previous lecture. 4 years later, Georg Lemaitre came up with another solution for the Einstein field equation, which strongly suggested that cosmological expansion is true. Not only that, but he suggested that the expansion is accelerating. In other words, not only is space expanding, but it's expanding faster with the passage of time. 2 years later, 1929, the bold line here, Hubble published his findings for several dozen galaxies, showing the redshift relationship as a linear relationship. That redshift on the vertical and distance on the horizontal had a linear relationship. That's a very simple relationship. It's as simple as you can get. And that he himself did not assert that the universe is expanding. In fact, he never said that to his dying day. It's a little controversial because there was a bandwagon effect, because this was monstrously exciting stuff. And so ever since Hubble died, every astrophysicist has asserted that Hubble discovered the expansion of the universe. You will never find the astrophysicists breaking rank on this. They state with an absolutely innocent, lamb-like face, very happy and excited because it's the most profound truth as far as they think. They believe it. They actually believe it. You and I can't. If we're scientists, we have to know We can't just believe them even though they all say it. Remember back in Copernicus's day, all the so-called scientists knew that the sun was going around the earth. You'd be out of your mind to say anything else, particularly because the Vatican said so, because the Bible said so, because God said so. Well, what's the weak link in that chain? Men. Men interpreting the Bible, interpreting God. That's two weak links in the chain. And then Copernicus showed that that was just total horseshit. And it took a couple of 100 years. But that finally changed everything. That Copernicus was right and everyone else was wrong. Copernicus was right and everyone else was wrong. And that's the way it is now. Copernicus was right, essentially. The sun does not go around the earth. So Edwin Powell Hubble published his findings, a very simple graph with his data that he got from the Mount Wilson telescope using spectroscopy, showing that there's a linear relationship between redshift and apparent distance. And that has been amply confirmed. The relationship is absolutely solid. But what does it mean? Hubble himself did not say that it meant that the universe is expanding. And one of his contemporaries, a man whom I consider to be the greatest astrophysicist of all time, Fritz Zwicky, also never said that the universe was expanding. Well, he got into a hell of a shitload of trouble for not going along with that. Because by the time Hubble died, that was law. Science was just thrown out the window. Strict science. The same, and there are analogies, and I've given you two. It's not unheard of for this to happen, but this is fantastic. That the universe is expanding. Is it? What I would like to drive home to you, as a truth seeker, you would like to, do you want to know, or are you just going to believe what these men say, even though it makes no sense? It does not make sense that space is expanding. It just simply does not make sense. So why do all the astrophysicists say that it makes perfect sense? If you want the truth, you have to be willing to come up with another solution. You can't just say that it makes no sense. I'll be showing you a Wikipedia article where Wikipedia actually says that if you have a theory that is law, the sun goes around the earth. Okay, let's say you have been thinking about this and studying it. Maybe you've done some experiments, but whatever the case, you say that is horseshit. Well, now all eyes are on you. What's your answer then? You can't just say that theory makes no sense, because the answer you're going to get back is, yes, it does make sense because there's no other theory. Nobody will say that because that's unscientific. The theory has to be true because there is no other theory. No, that doesn't make sense. But de facto, that's the way, at least Wikipedia says so. So if you're going to say that the universe is not expanding, then you must explain redshift. If it's not recessional velocity, then what is it? And if you don't have a better answer, then you've just got to shut up and compute. Now, in 1931, Einstein visited Hubble. You may know this story, but it is worth repeating. that up until 1929, Einstein did not go along with Friedman and Lemaitre and the others. Einstein was sick to his stomach. These were his own words. He was revolted by the idea of cosmological expansion because it makes no sense. But after Hubble published his findings, Einstein changed his mind and went to visit Hubble. Charlie Chaplin came out to see them. They partied. This was a world-changing event, even to the present day. And it changed religion. Before you can know what Pope Pius said, you have to know what happened after 1931. You can see there's a 22-year gap. The Big Bang had not been invented yet. Although obviously men were starting to think that way, because if everything is flying away from everything else, that means that they used to be closer together, right? Because if they're flying apart, and they've been flying apart forever, I guess you could put it that way, then you turn it backwards and see where it came from. Well, finally you get down to a point. Or a mush where everything is just not flying apart yet. And then it flies apart from its origin. That's the Big Bang. And it was George Gamow who really popularized that. A man of Russian descent. He was from Odessa, Ukraine, but both of his parents were Russian. And he escaped from the Soviet Union and came to the United States and became an extraordinarily popular science presenter. And he's the one who popularized a new theory based on cosmological expansion, the origin of the universe itself. Because he liked explosion. He actually was highly coveted as a scientist for his knowledge of subatomic particle physics. That was his area of expertise. So he's looking at this and getting really excited. He was squeezing everything back, and then he said that it was plasma, and then it was something undefinable but very, very hot. And time, you're winding the clock back to where all of these galaxies, everything in the universe, since it's all expanding and everything's flying away from everything else, well, that means it was flying out from something, and he extrapolated backwards in time and said that it exploded from something very, very tiny, unimaginably tiny, in which all the mass and energy of the universe was crammed. After that became popular, Pope Pius came out and made an announcement about the new Big Bang theory. Because there were two theories, one of them being promoted by Sir Fred Hoyle, had a steady state theory, and he said that matter was being continually created. But it is a paradox, and so his answer to the paradox was his absurd answer to go against the other absurd answer. And the Pope came out and said that Hoyle was wrong, and that George Gamow was right, and that the steady state theory is basically communist. You could check. But the Big Bang is biblical and scriptural, that it shows the authority of God. Because God alone could have created the Big Bang. Whereas the steady state theory had nothing to do with freedom and democracy and the Bible and love and puppies. And the steady state theory was communist, evil, atheist. And that's how it stood ever since. That if you believe in God, then you must believe in the Big Bang. Well, then in the 60s, God was eliminated. So now we're back to a cuckoo clock, nonsensical, absurd universe that's just expanding into nothingness or anti-nothingness. And it came from an unimaginably, impossibly anti-physical hot dot. And that's the state of science now. That's the universe. All the astrophysicists agree. It says they fuck God, fuck science, up with redshift, up with Hubble, who never agreed with cosmological expansion, and they've just been lying in their teeth ever since and just pretending that it all makes sense without the slightest sense of conscience, scientific or otherwise. It sounds insane. With no explanation, science is just thrown out the window, no logic, no rationality, no meaning. You just believe it because we say so. And that's how it stands right now. So how do you cope with this? What you don't want to do is say to any of these astrophysicists that the Big Bang is untrue. And therefore, they've surged ahead and said the CMBR proves the Big Bang. Because everything is expanding, they know how the galaxies form. They form by making muddy pools and somehow spiraling around, and they just stay that way. And then they slowly merge and form bigger galaxies and form black holes. And the black holes are going to merge, and eventually everything is going to be a black hole. Unless it just flies apart forever and it becomes a cold, dark universe for uncountable billions of eons. Sir Roger Penrose has taken them at their word on that and extrapolated on that. And those are your only two choices. Either the universe is going to be sucked into a giant black hole, and I guess they assume whatever happens after that, who cares? Or it's just going to keep flying apart until it's just dissipated into eternity. And that explains everything. There's your universe, kids. This is taught in the schools. I leave it up to you to decide if that's really science. Say, oh, wow, just pretend you're excited. You know, I just never really fully understood, how is it that the Big Bang, and just where did the Big Bang come from? And when they say, well, we're not really sure, I just stare at them and but I thought you knew. And then what's it expanding into? Well, you're too stupid to understand. Well, try me. Tell me what you know. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to say, I can't explain it. And then you're done. Because that's the end for a scientist. If you can't explain it, you're not a scientist. And just make sure that, just leave them with that impression, but don't directly confront them. Don't say you're wrong. Just make it clear that they don't know what they're talking about. Make them stay up that night. Just sweat it out. They won't, okay? But at least you did your part. I actually do know the right answer, and that'll be in the next lecture, and we're coming up on an hour. I hope you agree that it's important to get this out in the open. Okay, the universe is expanding. What's it expanding into? There's no answer for that. Just keep pounding on that. Just like it's the UFC. You got the person, you're just trying to get a triangle to choke them out, and just keep pulling on their neck. But don't ever tell one of these bastards that they're wrong. In the next lecture, I'll show you the meaning of the redshift. Fred Hoyle got it wrong. Any other answer is going to face the same paradox. If you say the universe is expanding like a raisin cake, you're safe. It's wrong, but you're safe. Because everyone else will agree with you. That's not science, but it is consensual. So it imitates science. You will not be able to challenge these bastards, but I can. There's only one thing a scientist can do. Get the right answer. Otherwise, you're just being emotional. This is Anagalactic, bringing you the secrets of the universe. Keep looking up. We'll be right back.